Hello and welcome. How can America implement its new security measures without discriminating against Muslims? These policies are designed to make our skies safer, says the Obama administration, but there's been tremendous criticism over Washington's decision to get tough on passengers flying to the US from 14 countries, 13 of them Muslim majority. The new measures were introduced after a failed attempt on Christmas Day to blow up a Northwest Airlines Delta flight about to land in Detroit. The alleged bomber, Omar Farouk Abdulmutallab, was a young Nigerian apparently with a explosive device sewn into his underpants. Passengers on the plane reportedly subdued him after they heard a series of pops and saw him trying to detonate the device. That triggered investigations in the US as well as the UK, where Abdulmutallab spent some time as a student, and Yemen, where he's believed to have been trained by Al-Qaeda. The 23-year-old boarded flights in Lagos and Amsterdam, despite US intelligence agencies and the State Department having information about him. US President Barack Obama criticized American intelligence agencies for failing to spot the threat, calling it a screw-up. On Tuesday, he announced new security measures where passengers from 14 nations, including Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, will be subjected to pat-downs, extra luggage checks and full body scans. Today we ask, is the US profiling of passengers based on their religion, or is this purely a safety measure as outlined by President Obama? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email and we'll take your phone calls on the show as well. Joining me now to discuss all of this is Christopher Calabrese of the American Civil Liberties Union. He's currently fighting data collection practices by the US government and the private sector that many fear could lead to the creation of a surveillance society. I also have with me Zohra Atmar, an Afghan-American who works for a contractor advising the US Department of Defense on issues related to Afghanistan and to Pakistan. I welcome you both to the show.
Thank you.
Christopher, if I could start with you and ask if you think these measures, the newly announced measures, are actually going to make America any safer?
Actually, I think they'll do the reverse. I think they'll make America less safe. I mean, when you're looking for terrorists, you're looking for a very small group of individuals, a small pool of people. And it's really like looking for a needle in a haystack. When you start screening passengers of 14 different countries, what you're doing is adding more hay to the pile. That makes it harder to find the people you're looking for.
Well, now, do you expect the measures to stay long-term, or is there something that could ease these, perhaps a better prior screening of passengers before they even get to the airlines?
Well, you know, I think history shows us that these measures can't stay in place forever simply because they are ineffective and they demand so many resources. It's not clear how long I think these will be in place.
Zohra, good to have you here as well with us. Now, what do you make of the list that the countries are now going to face extra scrutiny?
At face value, obviously 13 of the countries are Muslim majority or Muslim plurality countries. But I think it is a little bit of a stretch to say profiling, because they're not necessarily all Arab nations. They're not necessarily all Muslim nations. I think the bigger concern with this list is not necessarily that this might be a case of profiling. I think the biggest concern is that it just may not be effective in terms of deterring potential terrorists.
In fact, what danger is there that such measures, especially when they feel targeted, at least to a lot of people, and anti-Muslim to a lot of people, that they only boost the determination of those who are determined to attack the USA?
In some cases, but again, I think it is something where we might be giving Al-Qaeda and terrorist organizations more credit than they're due by saying that something like this is a sort of victory for them. In fact, I think a lot of Muslim Americans, what sets them apart, often from their counterparts across the world, is this sort of pragmatism, this understanding that, hey, look, the reality is a lot of these terrorists are coming from Muslim countries, and so we need to do our part to sort of show that, in fact, the threat is not Islam, it is this radical fringe.
Right. Chris, when the shoe bomber, Richard Reed, tried his attack on the airplane, everyone had to start taking off their shoes. A friend of mine joked at the time, thank goodness we haven't had an underwear bomber. Of course,
right.
Now that's happened. We haven't got quite to taking off our underwear yet. But what has this kind of level of scrutiny done to the civil rights of people?
Well, you know, it's clear that they're talking about implementing what we would consider this virtual strip search, which is this whole body imaging machine which shows people naked images of individuals and really intimate details about their bodies. Not just their body parts, but also things like a colonoscopy bag or even maybe an adult diaper. Things that are just really embarrassing and humiliating. And if we're going to go down that road, we're going to sacrifice a lot in terms of civil liberties and privacy.
Now, apparently, there's also the issue now in some countries that it may contravene anti-child porn issues as well.
You know, you're taking potentially a naked image of someone who's underage. Pretty much by definition, that's child pornography. And yeah, it's certainly raised problems in the UK. We'll see if those concerns are raised here as well.
Let's get a caller on the line. We've got Switzerland already dialing in. Manny, what would you like to ask?
Question is, why is UK not one of the countries listed among the 14 countries of people that will obviously have to be scanned entering the United Kingdom? Entering the US.
Right. Actually,
when obviously.
An interesting point you make there, Manny, and actually, Zohra, if I could put this to you, also with an email that came in which touches on a similar thing. It's from Sahroui Shaib from Illinois in the USA, who wrote in saying, as far as I can remember, Zakaria Moussaoui, the alleged 20th hijacker, was not coming from any of the listed risk countries, nor was he from there. He was French. This is profiling because there are more radicals in London than in Yemen or Algeria. It doesn't make sense. So again, why not something like that?
In fact, that is a perfectly good point, both the email and the caller. A lot of the recent attacks have come from people in London, from France, from Belgium, Amsterdam, and so forth, so on and so forth. We have a very strong extremist element in Western Europe, and to ignore that and say all of these countries are necessarily where you're going to find terrorists coming from, it's kind of missing the big elephant in the room. However, that doesn't mean, I mean, let's be quite honest. What happens today is we make this list. What happens tomorrow is you have cells in these countries activated because they feel they have a free pass. What you also have is a very easy adaptation in terms of just getting passports and nationalities in these countries for potential militants.
And Chris, actually, if we've been talking about the concept of profiling, and essentially we say it's a bad thing, but if there are certain countries from which these potential attackers come, and if they are from a certain type of background more often than not, doesn't it make sense to actually profile?
Well, one thing we've learned over the years is there's no one profile for a terrorist. In fact, and pretty much by definition, a terrorist is able to adapt if you pick a particular tactic. And that's essentially what this is. People from a particular country or a particular type of explosive device, they simply switch tactics. So it's really not effective to profile someone. And the other thing is when you start to pull from large pools of people, looking for a very small number of people. So the number of false positives, which is to say mistaken identifications, people who aren't terrorists, grows very large and wastes a lot of resources.
We had an email that came in from Kenya, if I could put this to you, from Mohammed Abdurrahim Sheikh, who says, America will never be safe until it stops its aggression against Muslims. Any Muslim who goes against the wishes of America is branded terrorist. Now, I know at the beginning you were saying that the countries aren't necessarily profiling because they aren't all necessarily specifically, Arab or Muslim or whatever. But if there is that perception that a lot of these tactics, a lot of these techniques and measures are anti-Muslim, what can be done to at least quell the fears that people have that it's not specific profiling?
I think that it behooves American Muslims in particular to reach out to their brethren, across the world. The reality is American Muslims have some of the best, I guess you could say the best track record with regards to other minority groups in this country. Socioeconomically, they're better off, they're better educated, and they've enjoyed a lot of the privileges that this country has to offer. Now, when the time comes to kind of put some of that patriotism to the test, you're not seeing that. Instead, you see a lot of this sort of crying, oh, foul play. I think let's be honest. So during the 2008 elections, we heard something like Joe Sixpack, XYZ. Well, when we hear Obama and other leaders saying things like, well, Islam is a religion of peace, yes, of course, I might think that, but Joe Sixpack might think that if all he sees about Islam is things like the underwear bomber and the shoe bomber. So we have to be real about this image that Islam has, and I think that reaching out to Muslims across outside the United States. So you say
responsibility on the part of Muslims to actually change the image as well?
Muslim Americans in particular.
Yeah. Well, let's get a caller on the line from Wisconsin. Charles, thanks for being with us. What would you like to ask?
I am not asking a question. Okay. I'm just making a contribution.
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that Nigeria was put on the United States terror watch list. And just to let the public know that Nigeria is neither an Islamic nation nor a Christian nation. It's the West that makes Nigeria seem as if it is an Islamic nation.
Right.
Nobody is sure of the population of Nigeria.
No, that's fair enough. I think Charles, that we were saying that the countries weren't all necessarily Islamic. Some of them obviously have a strong, Islamic population or a Muslim majority. But on that point, though, Chris, if I can ask you, what in effect, looking at the countries, is there something that you can see in common, apart from the fact that perhaps they were all involved in one way or another at some point in time?
You know, it's hard to do that. I mean, some are obviously, on the state sponsor of terrorism list. Some, I mean, honestly, putting Nigeria on the list seems solely because this particular attacker came from Nigeria. Now, I can think of no worse reason than that. I mean, there should be more evidence and more of a process. And I think it sort of points to the overall shallowness of this particular idea. Because if it's really just whatever we're responding to at this moment, right, that doesn't, serve our overall strategic objectives at all.
So each time there's an incident from one place, it gets added to the list.
Right.
So what do you make of the announcement by France? They would actually like to expand the list to maybe 20, 30 countries.
Well, I think that's a mistake. I think they'll find they're overwhelmed with false positives, and they're not getting the intelligence they should get on the few people they should be targeting.
In terms of equipment, is technology up to date? Is technology able to deal with the threat? Because in the case of the latest attacker, Abdul Muttalib, we had the issue of him carrying an explosive that wasn't, that the equipment couldn't have detected, the PETN. Is technology up to date?
I think not, and I think in fact it's always going to be a sort of game of catch-up. What concerns a lot of people in the days since this announcement about the 14 countries was made was, as they will increase technology, tactics will change. So if they start doing, for example, body cavity, certain like drug smugglers from South America, what you're going to end up having is a need to address that issue, and then you certainly fall into the thorn bush. Yeah.
What do you make of the scanners? I mean, as a Muslim woman who displays modesty in covering yourself, what do you make of these scanners that see through the clothes?
Well, I actually travel quite frequently, and I am consistently selected for random screenings. So that's always fun. Kind of, I show my friends, look, I'm going to get randomly selected. However, having said that, I do realize there's a necessity for it now. There needs to be sensitivity in employing these types of technology. So if you're going to see through clothes, you're definitely going to want to have a female to be on the other side of that technology. Do you feel very happy with it? No. Is that going to ensure a safer, trip for you? Then yes, you have to accept it.
Chris, an email we got from the UK from Abdul M. Ismail, who wrote in saying, this entire situation is down to cause and effect. The problem is increasing security is based on terrorism being the cause, whereas in fact terrorism is the effect resulting from the intrusive foreign policy of the US towards other countries. Meanwhile, the perpetual introduction of draconian laws to increase security serves only to diminish civil liberties of the entire population, not just extremists. So what's being said here is if foreign policy was to change, and this is a lot of people say this, if America's positioning and its foreign policy was to change and its approach to the rest of the world was realigned, that perhaps the targeting of America would be less, because it would be seen more as a benefactor and friend rather than someone who's going in and bullying and threatening the whole time.
I have to say that I take issue with that particular argument, and I'll tell you why. I look at terrorists from Timothy McVeigh, who was the Oklahoma City bomber, to Ted Kaczynski, who bombed scientists. These are not people with a coherent rationale. These are people who want to hurt and kill others, innocents, for their own particular agenda. Now that, to me, when you reach that point, you forfeited the right to be a legitimate political force. There's a lot of legitimate political actions that you can take. Terrorism is not one of them. And I just don't think equating US foreign policy and terrorist actions against innocents serves anyone well.
But it could be a motivating factor.
Well, I think that we want to beware that the actions that we take, for example, screening people from 14 different countries, doesn't raise sort of the perception that we are, we're enemies of those 14 countries. So we want to serve our own interests in that goal, but I don't think we can equivocate those two things.
Well, we've got to take a short break here. There are people waiting on the phone. We're going to get to those as soon as we can. Don't go away. More of our discussion in just a moment.